The smell of espresso mixed with faint notes of fresh pastries lingered in the air, a comforting yet bittersweet aroma that filled the small cafe. The afternoon lull had stretched longer than usual, leaving only the soft clinking of ceramic cups and the occasional rustle of newspaper pages to punctuate the quiet. Outside, the city moved at its usual pace, hurried footsteps against the pavement, car horns echoing through the streets. But inside, time seemed to slow. For Dana, the shift had already felt like a marathon. Every tick of the clock stretched on painfully, each second dragging as if it too resisted the monotony of the day. She had been on her feet for hours, her back aching, her fingers stiff from the countless cups she had carried from the counter to the tables. The cafe had seen a steady stream of customers earlier, but none had been particularly generous. A few polite nods, some half-hearted smiles, and meager tips that barely covered the cost of a cup of coffee. Rent was due in 2 days. Her phone bill sat unpaid, and the stress gnawed at the edges of her thoughts. She tried to push it aside, focusing instead on the simple act of wiping down the last table by the window. She stole a glance at her phone. Just one more hour. Her manager, an older woman with tired eyes and years of experience in her gaze, offered a sympathetic glance from behind the counter at her. It was the kind of look that said, "Hang in there." Dana mustered a small nod in return, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear before pulling her ponytail tighter. There was no room for self-pity, just another shift to get through, another day closer to making ends meet. Then, the bell above the door chimed. The soft jingle snapped Dana out of her trance. She turned her head instinctively, her well-practiced smile ready to greet the newcomer. At first glance, he seemed like any other customer. A tall young man with an air of quiet composure, dressed simply, yet impeccably. His plain shirt and slacks gave him an effortlessly put-together look, as if he belonged anywhere he chose to be. But there was something about him, something in the way he carried himself, that made her pause. 2 men followed closely behind, their movements subtle yet deliberate. They weren't just friends or casual companions. They were watchful, alert. They scanned the cafe with practiced precision, their sharp eyes flickering from corner to corner, before settling into an almost invisible stance. Dana had worked here long enough to recognize when someone important walked through the door. Her pen hovered over the notepad as realization dawned on her. No way. The young man had settled at a table near the far corner, choosing a spot that offered both privacy and a clear view of the room. When he glanced up, their eyes met for the briefest moment. And that was when it clicked. Barron Trump. Dana had seen his face on the news over the years. Son of the former president, often the subject of media speculation, despite his quiet demeanor. He had always been somewhat of a mystery, a figure in the background of headlines, growing up in a world few could understand. And now, here he was, sitting in her cafe, just another customer looking for a moment of normalcy. Her heartbeat quickened. It wasn't every day that someone like him walked into a place like this. But professionalism kicked in. She had been trained for this. No matter who sat at her table, they were all customers. No more, no less. She took a steadying breath and approached. "Good afternoon," Dana said, her voice even, polite. She had perfected the art of hospitality, masking her thoughts behind a practiced warmth. "Can I get you something to start?" He looked up again, his expression calm, yet reserved. There was a quietness to him, a presence that didn't demand attention, yet somehow held it effortlessly. His features were sharp, yet composed, betraying none of the weight that must have come with his name. "I'll just have a cappuccino," Barron said softly. His voice was smooth, polite, carrying an air of quiet confidence without arrogance. And maybe one of those croissants. Dinah nodded, her pen gliding across the notepad as if this were any other order. Absolutely. Anything else? He shook his head. That'll be perfect. Thank you. As she turned toward the counter, she caught the briefest exchange between Barron and the men seated a few tables away. They weren't speaking, but the slight nod from one of them confirmed her suspicions. They were security, discreet, but undeniably present. She placed the order, trying to shake off the surreal feeling that had settled over her. He was just another customer, just another coffee, just another order to serve. But something told her this moment was anything but ordinary. As she prepared the cappuccino, she stole another glance in his direction. He wasn't scrolling through his phone like most customers his age. Instead, he sat in a posture of quiet observation, taking in the atmosphere around him. There was a thoughtfulness in the way he carried himself, a kind of self-awareness that seemed at odds with the world's perception of privilege. The coffee machine hissed, filling the air with the comforting scent of freshly brewed espresso. Dana carefully poured the steamed milk, crafting the delicate foam into a near-perfect swirl. She placed the croissant on a plate beside it, its golden crust flaking at the edges, and arranged everything on a tray with practiced ease. Walking back to his table, she felt an odd mix of nerves and curiosity, but she kept her composure, placing the cappuccino and pastry in front of him with the same careful grace she had mastered over the years. "Here you go," she said with a small smile. "Enjoy." Barron nodded, offering a quiet, "Thank you." Dana turned to leave, but before she could take a step, his voice stopped her. "Excuse me," he said, his tone gentle but certain. She turned back, surprised. "Yes?" He hesitated for a fraction of a second, then gestured toward the window. "This is a nice place. Do you like working here?" The question caught her off guard. Most customers barely made eye contact, let alone asked about her experience. Dana blinked, then nodded. "It's nice. It has its good days." He studied her for a moment, as if weighing her words. Then, with a small, knowing smile, he simply said, "I bet you make it better." For a moment, Dana wasn't sure how to respond. Compliments in her line of work were often offhanded, fleeting. But there was something genuine about the way he said it. No expectation, no ulterior motive, just a simple observation. She felt warmth creep up her neck. "That's kind of you to say." He nodded once, then turned his attention to his cappuccino, letting the conversation end naturally. Dana walked back to the counter, her mind still processing the brief exchange. The shift continued. Customers came and went. The cafe's rhythm resumed its usual flow. And yet, something about that small moment lingered with her. When Barron finished his coffee and croissant, he stood, smoothing out his shirt before reaching into his pocket. Dana watched from behind the counter, expecting a standard payment like any other. But when she approached the table after he left, she found something that made her breath catch. A note, and beside it, a tip far more generous than anything she had seen in a long time. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the small piece of paper. The words, simple yet profound, brought an unexpected sting of emotion to her eyes. "Thank you for your kindness. Keep making the world better." And just like that, Barron Trump had left. Not just a tip, but a moment that would stay with her far longer than the shift itself. His words were simple, but his tone carried something Dana couldn't quite put her finger on. Kindness, maybe, or just sincerity. It wasn't something she heard often in her line of work. Most customers barely looked up from their phones when they ordered, their voices clipped, their patience thin. But this young man, with his measured tone and quiet presence, was different. She scribbled the order down and turned back toward the counter, trying to shake off the flutter in her chest. It was ridiculous, really. He was just another customer, another order, another cappuccino. But something about this moment clung to her, settling in a space between curiosity and unease. Dana reached for the coffee beans, pouring them into the grinder as she let the low hum of the machine settle her nerves. The cafe smelled of roasted espresso and warm pastries, but it was the kind of scent she had long since stopped noticing. Now, it wrapped around her like a familiar blanket, grounding her in the routine she knew by heart. Still, her gaze kept drifting toward the corner table. Barron Trump sat with a quiet stillness that felt almost foreign in a place like this. Most customers filled the space with noise, the tapping of fingers on laptop keyboards, the endless dings of notifications, the murmur of phone calls taken too loudly. But he simply sat, his back straight but not rigid, his hands resting lightly on the table. No phone, no distractions, just a young man staring out the window, as if watching the world move by without him. The steam from the cappuccino machine hissed as Dana frothed the milk. She kept her movements deliberate, steady, anything to distract her from the odd, nervous energy twisting in her stomach. Why am I acting like this, she thought, shaking her head slightly. It wasn't like she was starstruck. She had seen famous people before, though not many in a cafe like this. But there was something about the way he carried himself that made it impossible to look away. When the cappuccino was ready, Dana carefully balanced the tray in her hands and approached his table. She took a slow breath, reminding herself to keep it professional. He was just another customer. "Here you go," she said, setting the cup and pastry down in front of him with practiced ease. He looked up, his pale blue eyes meeting hers. A faint smile ghosted across his lips. "Thank you." "You're welcome. Let me know if you need anything else." She turned to walk away, but something made her pause. It wasn't anything obvious. Maybe it was the feeling of his gaze lingering on her for just a second longer than expected. Not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but in a way that made her feel seen, as if she were more than just another passing stranger serving another passing customer. Dana forced herself to keep moving, returning to the counter where she busied herself with cleaning an already spotless surface. The cafe had grown quieter, save for the faint hum of background music drifting from the speakers. Outside, the sky had taken on the golden hue of late afternoon, sunlight spilling through the large windows and casting long shadows across the floor. She stole another glance toward the corner table. He was still there, his fingers lightly tracing the rim of his coffee cup. There was a pensiveness in the way he held himself, a quiet contemplation that didn't quite fit the image she had of him in her mind. People always talked about the Trump family as larger-than-life figures, towering presences in politics and media. But here, in this small cafe, Barron Trump didn't seem larger than life at all. He just seemed human. Minutes passed, and Dana found herself slipping into the rhythm of work once more. She cleared empty plates, refilled sugar containers, wiped down counters. Every so often, she would glance back toward the corner, watching as Barron absently reached for his pen. He pulled a small receipt toward him, the paper barely crinkling as he began to write. She tried not to stare, but there was something almost secretive in the way he did it, the way his fingers moved quickly, as if he didn't want anyone to see, the way he folded the receipt so neatly, tucking it beneath his empty coffee cup as if it held something more than just numbers. Then, just as quietly as he had arrived, he stood, slipping his phone into his pocket and reaching for his coat. Dana watched as he took one last look around the cafe, his gaze lingering for only a moment before he turned toward the door. And just like that, he was gone, leaving behind only an empty cup, a folded receipt, and an unanswered question that gnawed at the edges of her mind. She hesitated, then stepped toward the table. Something told her this was more than just another forgotten receipt. With careful fingers, she reached down and unfolded the paper. And as she read the words scribbled across it, a lump formed in her throat. Dana watched him for a split second before she forced herself to focus, gripping the tray a little tighter, as if that could anchor her to reality. The weight of exhaustion still pressed against her shoulders, but something else had settled into her chest now. Something she couldn't quite name. "Thank you for coming," she called out softly, her voice barely louder than the cafe's background hum. Barron turned back just slightly, his expression calm, his gaze meeting hers with an almost unreadable warmth. "Have a good day." Those words were simple, polite, but for some reason, they lingered longer than they should have. As the cafe door swung shut behind him and the bell above it chimed its final farewell, Dana stood frozen, her eyes tracing the path he had just walked. Outside, the sky had begun its slow descent into evening, the sun casting golden streaks along the sidewalk. Barron disappeared around the corner, his security detail blending into the crowd. And then, just like that, he was gone. The cafe felt different in his absence. The stillness stretched, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Donna exhaled, slow and shaky, before shifting back into motion. She picked up her tray and made her way toward the now empty corner table, the one that moments ago had held the quiet presence of someone who had caught her so completely off guard. The cappuccino cup sat empty, a delicate residue of foam clinging to the inside. The croissant plate was bare except for a scattering of golden crumbs. Everything about the table was unremarkable, except for the receipt folded neatly beside the dish. Dana reached for it, her fingers brushing against the smooth paper. She had handled countless receipts in her time as a waitress. Some were left crumpled and stained, others barely glanced at before being discarded. But this one felt different. Heavier, somehow. She hesitated before unfolding it. And then her breath caught in her throat. At first, her eyes locked onto the number. 4 digits. A tip so large, it made her stomach drop. She blinked, convinced she was reading it wrong. A lump formed in her throat, and her fingers gripped the receipt tighter. But it wasn't just the tip. It was what was written above it. A note, scrawled in neat, deliberate handwriting. "Your kindness and hard work don't go unnoticed. My family has been where you are. Stay strong. Brighter days are coming." Dana's hands trembled. Her heart pounded in her ears as she read the words again. And again, her vision blurred as hot tears welled in her eyes. And before she could stop them, they spilled onto her cheeks. She stumbled into the chair across from where Barron had sat, her knees weak, her breath uneven. This wasn't about the money. It was never about the money. It was about the words. In a world where she often felt invisible, where her hard work barely scraped enough together to keep her afloat, where exhaustion weighed heavier than hope, someone had seen her, really seen her, and not just anyone. Dana let out a shaky laugh between the tears, wiping at her face with the back of her hand. She clutched the receipt as though letting go of it might make the moment disappear. She had no idea why Barron Trump had chosen this cafe, this table, this moment to leave behind something so deeply personal. But he had. She thought about all the nights she had spent lying awake, wondering how much longer she could keep pushing forward. About the bills she kept stacking in the corner of her apartment, unopened because she already knew what they would say. About the way people passed by her daily, never looking, never really seeing. But today was different. Dana inhaled, steadying herself, her grip on the receipt tightening with quiet determination. She had to tell someone. This moment couldn't just disappear into the void of another long shift, another exhausting day. Someone else needed to see what he had done. Someone else needed to feel what she was feeling now. And soon they would. Because the ripples of kindness, once set in motion, have a way of reaching far beyond what the giver ever intended.